I found out about Breath of Fire. I was asked on a patio if I wanted to videotape some interviews for a grant about a story called The Mexican OC. And it was stories about Mexican Americans or other Latinos in Orange County. And I went from being a videographer to being one of the playwrights. And it was four of us, and we sat in a room and we just wrote, brought our stuff back, wrote. And Breath of Fire was pretty new then. They'd only done a couple of readings, and it was just to my heart. I grew up in Orange County. I grew up in Huntington Beach, and I never felt like I fit in. And when I found Breath of Fire and I found Sarah, our artistic director, it was like love at first sight. And so I've been here ever since. Breath of Fire is a 501c3 volunteer-run nonprofit. I'm also the managing director, and our mission is to make more opportunities for Latinas in the visual and performing arts. However, everybody is welcome. We've had men of color. We open our door to folks with non-conforming gender identity. Everybody's welcome. It's just we want to make sure, and it's in our title, that there are the opportunities for Latinas, not just on stage, but behind stage as well. The importance of getting more and different voices out into the public is growing an audience. There's so many people in the world who are, in Orange County or wherever, who are not hearing their stories, so they're not going to theater. So, from a producer kind of way, why wouldn't you want to grow your audience? Why wouldn't you want to bring in younger people? I have a development background a little bit. Audiences are aging out, a lot of the traditional audiences. So this is a chance to bring in new people, bring in the new stories, and it's just so important for people of color to see themselves on stage. And it's just as important, from my perspective, that people be behind the stage. And it doesn't matter if it's a stage manager or if it's a director of development. That's a whole nother issue, that in upper management to have people of color in some of maybe the bigger theaters.
I first found out about Breath of Fire Latina Theater Ensemble probably about maybe 2 or 3 years ago. I was a student at UCI, and I had done a production with Sara Guerrero, which is one of the founders of Breath of Fire. And so through that production, I learned a little bit more about Breath of Fire. And so she told us that they had like writing sessions and they had other opportunities. So one day I just decided to go, and I've been there ever since. So it's been about 2 or 3 years that I've been with them. So all the classes that they offer and that have benefited me, they do like playwriting, and then they've done screenwriting. They've done sometimes just writing workshops where if you want to go with any piece that you are working on, or so it might be, I think it was just general writing, but whatever piece that you take in, we'd love to share and, feedback. We've also had like movement, acting. We've done recently musical theater. So there really are a range of workshops that they've done. And how they benefited me, I've got a taste of everything. So from playwriting, screenwriting, and sometimes they brought in like Jose Cruz Gonzalez. They brought in different playwrights, and then I believe there was a workshop, Theater of the Oppression, so they brought in somebody who like specialized in that. So I've been able to learn from different areas of theater and acting and playwriting, which has been awesome because that gives you a more, overall sense of what it all is. So you get a taste of everything. So the importance of having I would say like Latinx playwrights and scripts and all that good stuff is there's such a community out there that still hasn't had a voice, and we've been very limited in our choices of who gets to be that one spokesperson for that whole community. So definitely it's very important, like with Breath of Fire, to get different voices on the Latinx platform because not everybody's experience is the same. So really a range of voices and shows and scripts and actors as well. So. The importance of having bilingual plays performed is that you let another part of the community into this world. Right? So I think it's And also it makes everything more relatable. And so in essence, when you have, because many folks speak English and Spanish or just English, but what about the folks who just speak Spanish, for example, and not just Spanish, but in bilingualism and other communities who have dual languages, but it makes everything come together. The communities come together because there's an understanding. So when you have members in the audience who maybe couldn't understand one part or the other, like it still brings them in together because you got, those two communications going on.
I found out about Breath of Fire through a friend, Yolanda. She is also a playwright at Breath of Fire Latina Theater Ensemble. And she just told me about the wonderful community, and I was very interested. So I started going to their writing workshops. I've attended several Breath of Fire workshops, and if you go to the website, you can sign up for the newsletter to find out upcoming classes, which I highly recommend. They're taught by people who are experts in their fields, whether it's improv, musical theater, writing, acting, self-care, which is very important because it's very easy, I think, for artists in all fields to burn out. So self-care was a workshop that I enjoyed very much. But they are, like I said, they're very welcoming. No one will be turned away because of lack of funds or because of what language you speak or who you are. And they're very informative. They're easygoing, so, shy people can come. They're not intimidating. And you learn a lot. It's a very tight community. Like I said, you'll feel welcome and maybe walk away having learned a new skill and made new friends and feel like you have a place that you can come back to. The importance of keeping the Latina voice alive in theater and television and entertainment in general is that we have a huge Latino population here, and it's very easy for, even though it's a big community, a big population, it's very easy to not see them, to not hear them. To forget the Latina community's needs, wants, desires. Also, then all that might be available is a false narrative about the Latina community. So we need Latinas to tell their stories so that people who don't know the community and maybe even fear the community aren't just listening to false narratives about them.
First time I found about Breath of Fire was actually by scrolling through Facebook. It was about, maybe was it a year or two ago? I'm not even sure, but it was like an off day and I was just like kind of feeling uninspired. And then I saw a post about a playwriting workshop with Christina Leach. It was just like a one-time only thing, and then I didn't have anything that weekend, so I just went, and I loved it. And then I kind of like took a break, but then I joined again when they had another playwriting series. So because it actually gives folks a space to be creative, and it's like a very welcoming environment. Like it's actually like a family. Like I know so many people already, and we barely meet like at one workshop and we're already like this. It's like a place for artists, really. You just feel free, and yeah, like there should be more spaces like that, especially with the types of people that we have. Like, oh, everybody there. It's just like, yeah. As a kid, like I would always kind of like write little stories, and I even like wrote a novel when I was like 14, and it was something silly, like high school things, and I had this like idea for a screenplay, but it never really was. I didn't have the resources. Like my family wasn't really, we're working class. We didn't really do things that were kind of creative, and like at school it would be like only performance things that I would be involved in, but once I entered college and once I found Breath of Fire, that's when I really knew that there was a place for me to exercise that muscle that I've never been able to. So the first time I ever met any of the people at Breath of Fire, it was pretty cool because it was about probably 4 people and then Christina Leach, and it was a really great little meetup. And I remembered it was like a writing prompt that we had to use, like newspapers. And then I just had this story spark in there, and I was so excited, and then I had to share it, and it was great because it's like they all kind of saw that like spark, like, oh my God, like, oh, look at her, she found something. And when Diana Bourbano had her playwriting series, I think it might have been last year, the first class, it was eye-opening, and I remember riding the bus, because I would get there, I don't have a car, I'd just take public transit. Like I liked taking public transit, and on the way back, I had like this idea that came out, and I just started writing right after I took Diana's first class, and it was amazing. Like I had this idea all along. Like it was kind of semi-autobiographical, but not really, and it was just something in that class that day that just like made me, like, you should have seen me like in the bus. I was just like, whoa, and like it was 7 p.m. and I was getting off the bus, and I was like, whoa, I have something. I've never had anything before. Like I never really took a chance on myself. So I guess that's kind of like the awakening that I had.
I first found out about them because I was a regular attendee at the Pacific Playwrights Festival at South Coast Repertory Theater. I would just go every single year. And one of those years I met Sarah, and she was there, and I heard about this new company, so obviously it's been a minute. And I started to track her career and what she was doing. So it really was just meeting somebody in person and hearing about the company in a very organic sort of way. I think it's really important to have a group like Breath of Fire because you have a company that is focused on Latinx women. And I think it's really easy to think about Latinx theater in a broader way, and it is very inclusive in so many ways. But it's also really special and unique to have a woman-centered theater, and I think that that's a uniqueness that I'm interested in seeing sustained and kept. I think it's because, when we look at bilingual plays, we're really looking at plays that dance in both languages. And sometimes Spanish becomes just a flavor. Sometimes it becomes a primary language and English becomes a secondary language. It really depends on the play. But it gives us a chance to live in 2 universes at once, which is what Latino playwrights do. They live in these 2 worlds. And Spanish is just a physical manifestation of what those 2 worlds feel like and how they behave and what they truly are. I always think of it as having one foot on both sides of the border and this feeling of like somehow existing in between. And I think that's the experience of the Latinx person. And it's certainly the experience that we have when we experience a play that might be leaning more toward a language we're not as familiar with, or perhaps it's our experience that, hey, these are the 2 languages that dance in my head.
Breath of Fire's mission is to offer more opportunities in the visual and performing arts for Latinas. And it's important, I think, to local and Southern California communities because, one, it's in the mission that we're there to offer that space for Latinas that may not be there for other, within the local community. And I think it's just important to have a presence of Latinas and a Chicano, Latina, space just in the artist community. It's important to have bilingual plays because, again, you want the audience to hear themselves in it. They want to see themselves in the play. And, whichever way you can do it, whichever language you can get an audience member to relate and feel comfortable with the play, you should go for it. I would like to see more plays produced in Spanish. I'm actually a pocha, so I'm half white, half Mexican, and so I came to Spanish, in high schools where I learned Spanish, but poorly, very badly. And I had to go to college to learn all the bad words. My friends taught me that. But it's important to have the language because there's so many people who speak Spanish. They should be able to see plays and media in their language. Aspiring playwrights is they show up to one of our workshops and you just show up. That's all you have to do. You don't have to be a writer. You just show up and, if people want to share, they can share. If they don't have to. And we just sort of take everybody along and hopefully they'll get something out of it. We've had people who weren't playwrights who've come and taken the workshop. I think it's really important if you're an artist to try a different genre as well. I think it translates or brings something new to whatever your main art form is.
Breath of Fire came about, it was conceived in November in 2003. Along with a group of other women, I was at a women's luncheon, a Latina women's luncheon in Santa Ana, the Delhi Center. And there were all these women speaking about how they got into business or why they started what they needed to start. And there are very reasons, but really it was out of a need. A financial need or a need to support their family or a purpose that they felt that they needed to pursue. And that really inspired me to think about creating a theater company in Santa Ana. I had been working with other nonprofits, other organizations, but the idea of forming an all-female, specifically a Latina female, a Latina theater company, was conceived, or the idea began. And as to really getting up on its feet wasn't really until 2005, 2006, when Breath of Fire partnered with El Centro Cultural de Mexico to go after a grant from the California Story Fund, the California Council of Humanities, specifically a California Story Fund grant to tell the stories. And the project was the Mexican OC, where we collected over 35 plus stories to tell the stories of Mexican Americans, their history here in Orange County. And it's dated back to the beginning of Orange County to about 2006, 2007. It was a 2-year grant, matching grant, and that's when Breath of Fire emerged itself as a producing company, creating new work and producing new work. So that was really, really exciting. And then from there, it sort of continued to move forward. Through partnering with El Centro Cultural de Mexico, we were housed, and then we were able to have our own space. They became our neighbors, and so we continued to thrive, reaching out to Latino artists, theater artists in the community within Orange County, the surrounding communities, and nationally. So that's kind of where Breath of Fire started. It was sort of an idea that was sparked and inspired by other women who wanted to find their purpose, and being an actor in Southern California, I was struggling with auditioning and with trying to find roles that I felt could better represent a community that I was a part of. So creating opportunities for other Latinas in the performing arts was really important to me. I wanted something for me and for women like me. And that's how Breath of Fire came to be. What's interesting is the term Latino. As you know, it's gone through, I think language updates itself and finds its way through generations. Currently, we are calling our stories Latinx, but I know that Breath of Fire still remains a Latina theater ensemble, although we do not live in a vacuum. Having these stories through the lens of Latinas, Latinos, Latinx is important. They are universal stories, so regardless of your cultural background or your racial background, I believe these stories can be relevant to many communities. And for me, what's exciting is to see these stories staged or read for future generations. As a child growing up, I remember trying to find myself in stories. And when I could see myself not really making those conscious connections, it excited me. I saw myself, or I saw my family, I saw the stories that I felt I was a part of. And I think that was really exciting. So being able to share that to not only to youth, but adults, families, communities, seeing themselves stage, seeing their story stage is really exciting and is really important, and why Breath of Fire has also come to be. In 2011, Breath of Fire was in the middle of a crossroads. We had done a beautiful production of Angel of the Desert by Janine Salinas, and we had presented that at South Coast Repertory. And that was incredible to be a part of. It was part of their studio series. And we came back home and we all felt a little tired and exhausted and curious about what else could be out there for us, as not only just as a theater company, but as individuals. We are a volunteer-based organization, and people come and go. We are happy to support people, and we're happy to see them grow. And that included myself. I was curious about what else was out there for me, and could I survive without my theater company? And I felt like a lot of ensemble members may have felt that way as well. I mean, I can't speak to everyone, but and also our neighbors, El Centro Cultural de Mexico, they were going through something horrific. They were evicted, and to lose them in our building it felt like it was an opportunity for us to also leave. So they were forced out, and we decided to close our doors. And financially, it became difficult. I mean, running a theater company, managing a nonprofit, producing work, it's not an easy business. And I think it was an opportunity again to close our space. But as to whether or not Breath of Fire was officially closing was still. There was no period at the end of that statement. It was more about like, well, what if we went nomadic? What if we let go of our space? What does that mean to us? How do we then continue to work together? And so we went nomadic. We went on I would say a working hiatus, like in quotation marks. And it was interesting because I know that other artists went out and did their own thing and find their own way. And I, as a theater artist as well, theater professional, I also found my way too. So that was hard. But it was also, it was a bittersweet moment. But in 2015, it felt right to reemerge ourselves. Now, it kind of came through my relationship with Santa Ana. Again, stepping away from Breath of Fire, seeing how I worked, and were there other opportunities to work with other organizations, trying to support theater in Orange County. And so I had worked with several organizations, Arts OC, which is the Orange County Arts Council, and then I began heading a project for South Coast Repertory, the Dialogos project, which was also another large project funded by the James Irvine Foundation, and that was a 2-year grant. And that project was really about working with the Latino community, Latinx community of Santa Ana, and to find that story. And that was something that I worked in partnership with Jose Cruz Gonzalez, who's also a phenomenal playwright, who was also responsible for the Hispanic Playwrights Project at South Coast Repertory. Now, I've been a faculty member for South Coast Repertory for almost 13 years now. So I had already a relationship with them, and they knew my relationship with Santa Ana. They knew my relationship with Breath of Fire. So it was really excited to work at that capacity with that kind of budget to re-engage with my community. And I learned so much more about my community, which was really exciting. And so that was a 2-year project. It's to this day still my favorite project, and it's really close to my heart. By engaging with a lot of people and hearing their stories, and Jose was so great about sharing what he did, and then I had a team of 10 teaching artists who also shared what they did, and there was a lot of follow-up with community people who had participated, wanting more, like, how do I write my own play? How do I do this? How do I do that? And so I, knowing that SCR had shifted their attention elsewhere, I decided to look at an opportunity. How do I, wanting to still work with my community, really building all these beautiful relationships. It was hard to not do something. And so I reached out to a lot of playwrights and theater artists that I'd worked with, and I said, listen, there's a want, there's a need. I don't have a budget. I don't have the budget that I had before, but listen, could you donate some time and do what you do best? And we're going to do it for 10 weeks. What can you do? And within that 10 weeks, we did 10 workshops, and we had, I think a returning group of people between 30 to 45 people. And we had so it became a playwriting, theater making workshop series. And it was really about sharing how to write your story. And out of that, there were like 40 stories, 45 stories that came out of that. And that was exciting and renewing and just wonderful to hear. And what I also loved about it is because we had no space, we had no money, people donated their spaces to us. And that included the Latino Health Access, ALCA, Frida Kahlo, the Frida Cinema in Santa Ana, and the Grand Central Arts Center, and community members, like neighbors, like they opened up their backyard and said, here, why don't you do it in our beautiful backyard? And I even hosted one in my backyard. And it was really exciting because we sort of took people who knew the community, or maybe didn't quite know the community, but would go to these different workshops in these different locations. And sometimes the workshops would be in relation to the space, and we would write a little bit about that, which I thought was also really exciting. And not always, it just really depended on what the teaching artist wanted to present. And that was really exciting. We had, again, Jose Cruz Gonzalez, we had Christina Leach, Diana Burbano, Estela Garcia, Armando Molina, Kimberly Colburn, Bernardo Solano. It was phenomenal. And I'm probably forgetting somebody, I hope not. But that was like our launch. And they all donated their time, people donated their spaces, and people showed up. And so the idea was, okay, so for those who wrote something, who wants to now do a shared reading? And that was hosted at the Frida Cinema. And that was our concluding component to the 10 weeks. And what was unfortunate during that time is one of our founding members, Gina Davidson, had passed away. And I grew up with Gina here in Santa Ana. And to have this theater with her was really beautiful. Sharing theater with her was really awesome, really special. She was my theater sister. And to see her go was really, really hard. And it's still, it still bothers me to this. Who wouldn't be affected by that? But we grew up together, and we went to Cal Arts together. And we always would talk about, what we could do. And so concluding the new works, or the 10-week session was also honoring her because she inspired so many people. She was always one of those quiet people who would have the best idea in the room, and she was an amazing costume designer. So I know that with every time I hear a story, I can't help but think of what would Gina say, So that was also marking a hard time for Breath of Fire, but also a celebratory time. 2015 is when we did our first series, and when we moved forward and we were looking for spaces, we obtained a residency through Grand Central Arts Center, which is part of Cal State Fullerton, and Grand Central Arts Center is a gallery space, is a resident space for artists who are attending Cal State Fullerton, who are also doing work in the community of Santa Ana and Orange County, specifically Santa Ana. And so we were invited to be resident artists at Grand Central Arts Center. So we have a space. So that was wow, we can continue our work. We don't have to worry about spaces. Although that doesn't mean that we don't do our work outside of our space, because we definitely have, and we continue to do so. But it's nice to have a home. It really is. And so that alleviates overhead and in a place where we can converse, hear our work, write our work. In fact, today is our writer's lab. It's every first Sunday. We open up our space, and it's sort of like circuit training for writers. And it's not a formal workshop. It's just like, hey, if you're interested, if you need a space to write, if you want to share your work, we have Wi-Fi access, come to our space. So that's been really exciting. I had been directing a piece called Rosado by Cole Santiago, and that was for the John Lyon New Works Festival at Cal State Los Angeles. Jose Cruz Gonzalez, again, invited me to go work with with his group over there. And so the piece is about a young woman who is having her quince out of, and she doesn't want it, but her family is really persistent. Anyhow, so being involved with this one particular piece reminded me of my community, reminded me of Breath of Fire, that she's 15, and how do we celebrate her? How do we, and again, like quinceañeras is about coming of age, about coming into one's adulthood, about letting others know that they are here and that they are joining the adulthood and leaving childhood. So what does that mean to Breath of Fire? What is she going to, what is she doing at 15? How is she going to be seen as an adult? How is she going to move forward? And that's always a question, but I'm excited to attach and launch her 15th as part of this New Works Festival. So the 15 stories are marking the 15 years of Breath of Fire. And how does a playwright get involved with Breath of Fire? I think it's really about what a playwright wants. And I think that's an important question to ask yourself as a writer. Like, what do you want? What do you need? And those are things that we always ask our playwrights. I think what's really important is to come check out our writer's lab. It's the first Sunday of every month, and they're free. I recognize that what we do may not be for everybody. And I know that people are sometimes looking for their plays to be produced, and I ask myself, is your play ready to be produced? I mean, what is it that do you need a stage reading? What is it that you want to do? Do you want feedback? So I think our place is really about examining your play. What's working, what's not working? What kind of questions do you have for your audience, for your listeners? How can we strengthen your play? So that's kind of where we're at with Breath of Fire. We have partnered with productions and with plays getting up on their feet, but really we're here for writers who want to know what else do I need to do to strengthen my play as a writer.
I teach at Orange County, I teach at Chapman University, and I heard about these wonderful workshops, and I thought, I'm a teacher, I want to also learn. So I went to one of their workshops, and I was blown away. I'd seen some of the work from the people in the ensemble, but to be there in that space and to see how inclusive it was, to see how warm the people were, I knew I wanted to be part of it. When we think about community theater and theater that responds to the needs of a particular place, we often think that it's somehow like less good than something that we might see at South Coast Repertory or something that we might see at like the Taper Forum. But what Breath of Fire proves is that you can have artistic excellence, you can have training, and you can really engage an audience deeply with where they are and reach beyond that audience and still be grounded in Santa Ana. I mean, I think that the example that it sets for the young people in the community, all you have to do is look at the careers it's launched and the contributions that the writers, directors, poets, you don't get that quality of people to come and to come back and teach and to come back and share their work unless there's something really vibrant and vital. Because we live in a bilingual, multilingual world. I mean, Americans have been very slow on learning other languages because we haven't had to. I mean, English, of course, is the international language for business in many ways. But we live in a place that is going to soon be a Latinx plurality. And it's not just about the numbers, it's about the sensibility. It's about understanding that we're literally living and working and playing and growing and dying on land that was indigenous and was at one point Baja California. And to have these conversations in theater at this point in time, I think is essential.
I found out through a friend of mine. She mentioned them that it's somebody from theater. That's how we all meet in theater. Oh, you should come check them out. And I went to a workshop out on a whim, out of curiosity. And I think it was probably the introduction to playwriting workshop that I went to, just out of curiosity. And I completely fell in love with them. I was more drawn to Breath of Fire because of their vibe and how much fun it is. But they were really encouraging. We're here to develop new voices. Why don't you write? And that's when I started writing and realizing I can do this. I can actually write plays, because theater is something that I absolutely love. I go to the theater all the time, but I never really thought that I would be somebody that could write something that would end up on a stage. Groups like Breath of Fire are very important because they give a voice to women and people of color. One of the most beautiful things that Breath of Fire does is create community, and community that is surrounded by love, and creating out of love where we're all there to support each other and really stand for each other to create something beautiful. One of the biggest missions for Breath of Fire is developing the voices of new playwrights so that they're getting produced. But they're also building community, and they offer a lot of workshops about many different things, from acting, improv workshops. I am the resident improv instructor for Breath of Fire. And it's developing those skills so you can become a better writer, but it's really to become a better human being in connection and really in touch with your creative side.
Rarely do you find a bilingual, a two language playwriting course or see that on stage. It's usually monolingual, English only. So a person like myself who's grown up to speak both languages and to hear both languages at the same time in the same sentence, that's comfortable for me, and that's what I relate to. I find that with Breath of Fire, what is very important as an organization is that the Hispanic, the diverse community that has not been able to have their stories put out in the media, in the general media, that this is helping to set up a platform so that people can get past that and can get their work out there and into the larger mainstream media. The Breath of Fire people, the ones who founded Breath of Fire, like Sarah Guerrero and Diana Bourbano, they're very passionate. They're very skilled at what they do. They're very passionate about allowing and having a space for other individuals to write and find a voice. And so that is very inspiring for me, and they inspire others, and that's what makes them, I think, legendary and in their own right to that Breath of Fire will continue to go on because of what they have imbued into the organization.
So I first found out about Breath of Fire when I was 17, which was a couple of years ago. I was part of Barrio Writers, which is an organization based in Santa Ana. And we happened to be sharing the same building with el Centro Cultural de Mexico on Broadway, and Breath of Fire's little black box theater was also housed there. And through some folks, I believe it's Glau, their name now is David, and they wanted to start something similar to Barrio Writers, which was enriching teens in the neighborhood and doing that but with theater. And so I believe they had a conversation with Sara and folks from Breath of Fire, and the space was open and available. So some students from Chapman would mentor us, and that was my first exposure to Breath of Fire. It's important. I see it as something that is multi-generational, that is not monolingual, that allows for folks that not just folks that identify as Latinas, but very much rooted in that, and very much loud about that and unapologetic about that. I think that's something really important to be in Orange County, and to be loud and proud and honest about that work. That makes a big difference. That makes for authenticity, and gives room for a lot of growth for all the writers and the creators that come through. Breath of Fire has affected the artistic community. It's affected me and my accessibility, I can say, to the arts. If it wasn't for Breath of Fire, I don't know what I would really be doing artistically, because it is it's a home base for a lot of artists. I think that when there's so much change happening in Santa Ana and in Orange County, and there's so much of like taking the good about the community and then taking out the bad, which could mean people, which could mean places, which could mean restaurants, which could be community spaces. To have a space, even though we are in a lot of ways we are nomadic, to have a space allows for folks to just be curious. We've had so many people just come in and see, like, what is this about? We've had people, teenagers wanting to be interested in learning more, and it's always a conversation I feel that we have to have with the community as well, and that's a step that we're also trying to get to is how do we have conversations with the community and continue to have accessibility. I've had the privilege of doing some self-care workshops with different community spaces in Santa Ana, and been brought by Breath of Fire to put these events together. And I think that's also it, is how do we break the walls and break the idea that professional theater can only be access to a certain amount of people, or like to specific people, and opening that up, because there's so much opportunity. As I said, there's so much opportunity for all of our lives to be enriched. I think that these classes are so powerful because, specifically with Diana, I can tell you that she will make you feel like your story matters. And it's beyond that. I think, especially for people of color, it's so important that we are told that our stories matter, that our lives matter, that our ideas matter, that our imagination matters, and that we can live, that we've lived in the past, that we live now, and there's a possibility of us living in the future, and us writing that and writing these narratives down, and I think there's so much power in that. When we realize that we have that power, regardless of whatever job or career aspirations you have, it's a process of really learning that your story matters.
When I found out about Breath of Fire was a few years back from Sarah Guerrero, who is the artistic director and founder. We're colleagues at South Coast Repertory Theater, where we both teach. We're instructors in the conservatory. And she had mentioned the idea of me coming in and bringing some of my talent to teach stage combat, which is one of the skills that I have. And then I got involved in also helping the group do a teaching workshop as well. Later on, through the auspices of South Coast Repertory, we were both involved in the Alagos, which is a project to go into Santa Ana and connect with the community and tell their story. So I was a teaching artist there, and that is how we first met. It is important to have Breath of Fire in Santa Ana because it follows through with what the idea originally Diálogos was about, which was to introduce theater arts to a community that does not necessarily have a voice. They have many stories to tell. We all do. It's a universal thing. And it was a wonderful thing to be able to go into their community, learn about them, and then teach them in a way what theater was like and how to tell their stories, writing, performing, and getting together as an ensemble, as a community. Breath of Fire continues to do that. Breath of Fire continues to provide an opportunity for this community to find and develop its creative voice, to continue to expand, including more and more of the community so that they feel empowered to tell their stories. Having theater presented bilingually, whether it's English and Spanish or Spanglish, as it were, is important because it resonates. It resonates with the audience that is watching it. For example, when I watch TV, I grew up with television and theater and the idea of, Mission Impossible and West Side Story and Cinderella, etc. But when I saw La Bamba, the film by Luis Valdez, when I see on television the One Day at a Time remake on Netflix, which brings in language and characters and situations that are comparable or resonate with my life, it connects with me. It's a story that's being told for me, about me, and it includes me. That's what's happening in that community. It makes them feel a part of the process of the human condition.
I was in this amazing playwriting class at South Coast Repertory Theater, and Sarah was in the class with me. And I was working on a musical, and Sarah was very encouraging. We would share our works within the group, and she was one of the people that just kept making amazing suggestions. And so when the class was over, I still wanted to write, and the class didn't happen for another year again. And I asked her if she knew of anything, and she said, I have a group called Breath of Fire, and we would love to have you. And I hesitated because I'm not a Latina. And I said, do you really want me to come? And she said yes. And so I've been with them ever since. They're an amazing group. I feel incredibly fortunate to be a part of the Breath of Fire group. It's really significant. First of all, when I go to the space to write there, I write. I don't even have a hesitation. But in addition, having that kind of feedback from people who love to write and love other people, I have to say that's been one of the most inspiring, nurturing, safe places I could ever have written. And you need a place like that. The piece I wrote, for example, I would never have written in another spot. It's extremely political. It expresses something that I felt within the group and then felt compelled to write about and had the resources and the place to write it. So having something like Breath of Fire makes a huge difference in the artistic community for those who want to write and maybe aren't the first choice where other people reach out to have us write.
I've been working at South Coast Repertory for about 14 years now, and I knew Sarah. She was a teacher there, and we were involved with a piece called Diálogos with South Coast Repertory, and we devised a play that Jose Cruz Gonzalez wrote called The Long Road Today, El Largo Camino de Hoy, and so we were in the city of Santa Ana for 2 years straight with South Coast Repertory, and spent a lot of time with the people there, spent a lot of time working in the community, and I became very passionate about staying in the community, feeling like we were giving them resources, we were giving them, there was acting resources, there were playwriting resources, we were really bringing a kind of an art into the community that maybe hadn't been there before. And then when the South Coast Repertory project was over, I really felt passionate about staying. So I hooked up with Sarah, and just decided to join Breath of Fire, and I started teaching playwriting classes for the community there, and that's how it started. Well, Breath of Fire does a powerful job of bringing the community into the theater and then including them, which I think is something that maybe a lot of the bigger theaters don't know how to do. I feel like Sarah is brilliant at getting people to come, which is the first step of any kind of theater, because, theater is, it's a difficult thing to make people want to do for some reason. You talk to anybody, they're all actors, all their kids have been in plays, everybody is in the theater, but nobody's really in the theater. I mean, when you talk about it among professionals, there may be, it's more than this, but it feels like there's only 2,000 people in the entire business. It's very small. But what Sarah has managed to do is she's gotten the community to come in and work with her, work with us, write their plays, tell their stories, really learn from the ground up what it is to do a dramatic theatrical piece. The important thing about getting the Latina voice, and specifically bilingual plays, is that Spanish has become a radicalized language. It is a radicalized language. People feel offended when they hear it. They think somehow that because we include words that they don't understand, that we are either talking about them or challenging them, as opposed to embracing the language. It's you don't find that same kind of angry reaction when you put words in French in or words in Russian, and so it's really very interesting to find. And also here in Southern California, everybody is mildly bilingual anyway because we've been raised this way. We speak taco, right? Everybody loves tacos. That's pretty bilingual right there. You know how to order it from a restaurant. You know all the joke things like how to say where's my beer and where's the bathroom. You probably know a lot more Spanish than you think you do. And the moment you open your mind to it, then you're forced to see the humanity of the people that maybe you don't want to see their humanity. So I feel like it's always very important to just open your mind to that. And I mean, I know that for example, if I go see a piece of theater in Polish, which I have done, you are at first going, I don't understand, I'm totally at sea. But you allow these things to wash over you. You start understanding because the languages it's not that different, the way people relate to each other. It isn't. You just let it wash over you and see what you learn and see how it affects you. Just write, just finish. Because a lot of us have great ideas, and I hear this a lot because I do a lot of teaching in the community with people who don't know how to write, quote unquote. Write the story. And I always tell everybody, just write the crappy first draft. It's going to be terrible. It really is. It's okay. I mean, some of my plays, even now, some people might say, but some of, the very first drafts are terrible, but then you have something on paper that you can go back and dissect and fix and work on. If you stop yourself or you go halfway, you're imposing limits on yourself that you do not have to impose. It never has to be good. Nothing creative ever has to be good. There's no such thing. There's no perfect play. There's no perfect piece of art. It just has to exist, and so that's my advice to anybody who wants to be a playwright, any kind of writer, is just finish something. Do this whole story, make it happen, put it on paper, or however you do it on your computer, and then go back and edit. But don't edit yourself while you're doing it, and don't let that little voice in your head that tells you you're bad and you're crap and you're no good, just ignore it completely. Aspiring playwrights can join Breath of Fire by coming to take our classes. We always offer them free to the community. We're very lucky to be recipients of several grants that allows us to pay our teaching artists while making sure that it is always free and accessible to anybody who wants to come in and learn.